Bienvenidos. This is a podcast that explores Latinx media and culture in its many forms. I am Dr. Rojo Robles.
And I am Dr. Rebecca L. Salois. And we are Latinx and Latin American Studies professors at Baruch College in New York City. In this podcast, we will analyze Latinx film, television, literature, art, and cultures.
We will consider how these works are perceived, analyze them, and investigate the real-world reflections and implication of that work on Latinx cultures in the U.S. and beyond.
Welcome to Latinx Visions.
Bienvenidas, bienvenides, bienvenidos.
Welcome back, everyone. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at children's picture books, and we're going to discuss the importance of border stories for children, and honestly, adults of all ages.
Then, in the main section, we will be exploring two specific titles, Mama's Nightingale by Edwidge Danticat and Bright Star by Yuyi Morales. Both of these children's picture books approach telling border stories in distinct ways that are age-appropriate without erasing the importance of teaching children about the borderlands.
And in the final section, we'll briefly discuss the ways in which the authors utilize intertextuality and multi-texture-ality. Yeah, I know, it's a word I just made up, but I think it's going to work, so stick with me on this. It does make sense. But we're going to look at those two things and how the authors use them to tell these stories. And we'll finish up with a couple of recommendations.
When we talk about teaching kids about the border, we're not just talking about geography, maps, or politics. We're talking about values, what it means to live in a complex and very challenging world with dignity, justice, and care. Land and water borders aren't lines on paper. They're places where many families are torn apart, where children are locked in cages, and where migration, something humans have always done or needed to do, is criminalized.
The militarization of the border harms people. It harms the land and the ecosystems that sustain life. Walls cut through deserts, rivers, and animal habitats, blocking migration routes for species that have moved freely for centuries. Surveillance towers and floodlights disrupt the rhythms of nocturnal animals, while construction destroys sacred indigenous sites and fragile environments. When children learn about this through stories, history, and age-appropriate content, they can begin to see what's at stake is both human dignity and the health of the earth itself.
And that opens space for advocacy, for keeping families together, for treating asylum seekers with respect, for challenging the cruelty of detention centers and the prison industrial logic behind them. Borders have a history, born out of conquest, colonization, and exploitation, and once kids recognize that, they can imagine something different. They can grow up knowing it's possible to live in a world where movement and survival is not punished, where communities care for one another, and where Earth is protected instead of destroyed by walls. Today, I will be talking, as I said at the beginning, about Mama's Nightingale, the 2015 children's book by Haitian-American author Edwidge Danticat and artist Leslie Stubb. This is one of my daughter's favorite picture books. I'm constantly reading it and finding new elements of its brilliance. The story is about a young girl named Saya and her mother who has been detained by U.S. immigration authorities. But Danticat gives us so much more. It's about how immigrant families cope with separation, how children process the trauma of detention and deportation, and how creativity and community can turn pain into advocacy. Danticat doesn't restrain herself from showing or suggesting the harsh realities of migration, the ICE race, the endless judicial paperwork, the way entire families are criminalized or surveilled. What's powerful is how she shows the strategies Saya and her family use to hold on to hope and love despite these obstacles. Let's look at 4 of them.
All right, let's do it.
First, the first one will be storytelling. Storytelling is central in Mama's Nightingale. Even though Saya's mother is behind bars, she tells Haitian tales, especially one on a nightingale searching for her way back home. These stories keep her daughter connected to her mother's voice and her culture. They are a lifeline. They remind Saya that her mother is trying her best to surpass the separation. She's also a keeper of memory, tradition, and imagination, all tools of liberation. In a way, storytelling resists the silence and erasure that detention tries to impose. The illustrator Leslie Staub recreates this dimension by designing a vivid palette of blue, green, and pink, and a style that puts us in Saya's worldview and imagination.
And I think the storytelling is something that that's been around since humanity's been around, but especially when we're talking about Haitian stories, that oral tradition, the enslaved Africans who were brought over from the continent, all brought that storytelling with them. And this seems to just be a continuation of that tool as a way of connection.
Yeah, and we see also like the how Danticat is also signaling yes to Haitian culture, yes, yeah, to the situation, the specific and distinct situation of Haitian migrants. But she's also like pointing us to understand these stories also from the point of view of the larger diaspora, the larger African diaspora, as you said, by bringing that cultural element that has been with Afro descendants for so many centuries.
Exactly.
Well, I wanted to mention another method of advocacy and the holding on to hope that I was mentioning. Yeah,
right.
The second one will be voice recordings, precisely the voice, the sounds.
Which we love here.
Yeah. So Mama, sends these stories we have been talking about through cassette tapes. Yeah. So Saya listens to her voice, as she's reading, or more so, performing these stories. Yeah. The tapes allow Saya to play her mother's words again and again whenever she feels lonely. This is about emotional comfort, of course, agency. Yeah. The recording lets Saya decide when she wants to feel close to her mom, and they give her a sense of control and documentation in a situation where much is out of her hands.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of having her voice there brings it to another level, right? I know you'll get into this in a little bit, but the letter writing is one thing, but hearing the voice adds a different dimension to it. It brings that connectivity between the mother and daughter back to the forefront. And also that element of control that you're talking about is like she can decide when she wants to listen and when she doesn't. If it's too overwhelming and she misses her mother, then maybe she doesn't engage. I mean, this might not be all in the book, but it's something that we as readers can infer or can maybe connect from our own experiences.
Also, her body is captured, right? But her voice is free in a way, right? Because she's like recording these stories, performing them for her daughter. So there's a level of embodiment through the voice,
Gotcha,
Even though she's not in the home, she's not with her, physically speaking, the voice leave a trace of her body. Yeah.
It makes me think back to the episode that we did with Elena Casanova Burgess, where she was talking about audio recordings from within Puerto Rico that were used in her podcast episodes.
Yeah.
But that even within the narrative of the podcast story, that it connected the main character back to Puerto Rico, even though he'd never actually been there. It was that sound really bridges.
The way he was able to create an image of Puerto Rico was through the sounds that the grandmother sent. And here something similar happened, that Saya is able to recreate the mother's body through the sound of her voice. So I want to mention another thing that it's very important in Danticat's book, and that is, as you said a little before, letter writing, right? So we have both techniques. We have the voice, we have storytelling, but also we have letter writing. In this case, it's not the mother necessarily who writes the letter, although it is implied that they also like have some kind of situation in which the whole family is sending letters to each other. But the letter writing I'm referring to here is more about how Saya and her father are reaching out to a larger community.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's not like the letters per se from the mother are really the audio recordings, and this is more about expanding to community.
Precisely.
Okay.
Yeah, Saya grows more aware of her family situation and what is happening to her mother. She begins to write letters just like her father, who has been endlessly writing letters to many agencies, institutions, newspaper. So Saya decides to join in, right? These letters written as a duo are turned outward. Right, they don't stay within the family. They are a cry for help for a community, for a larger community. They are letters to the government. There are letters to newspaper and to anyone who might help.
Yeah.
So here, writing becomes both, a coping strategy. Yeah, they're dealing with the absence of the mother, with dealing with a very painful situation related to the lack of documents, but also it becomes a tool of resistance for the whole family. Yeah. For a child, letter writing is a way of saying, I see what's happening and I will speak back to it, but of course in my own words, and on my own way of understanding reality. So it transformed her grief into action, showing that young voices matter in the fight for migrant justice.
And I think this idea of a medium that is so personal, a letter, being publicly disseminated really can pull at the heartstrings of different individuals, of, publishing something like that in a newspaper. It just makes me think of there was a Christmas story I remember growing up about, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, and it was a little kid who sent a letter to a newspaper, and they published it and wrote a response. And the whole world saw it, or the whole community saw it. And in this case, by sharing, the letters to the government are their own thing, but into newspapers and stuff, you're getting the everyday person who is reading that story, who's reading that letter, and it humanizes the efforts that Saya and her father are making, it seems like.
And there's a little background in the story that Danticat offers, and is that the father has been trying, reaching out to so many people for a long time, and nobody has responded. But once Saya joins in with her own perspective, and this is something great about the story, that the father is not trying to control the way she's narrating the events. Actually, that becomes a very important tool to call the attention of important people within media that can amplify their voices.
And it shows children that they have a power with their voice as well, right? The children reading the book, they can see that just because they're a kid doesn't mean that they can't make a difference.
Yeah, and in this case, actually, what allows for a community to join in their call for justice is precisely the fact that it was told by a child.
Right, exactly.
So when Saya's letter is finally published by a newspaper and the television news follows through as well, their family struggle becomes visible to a larger community. So strangers begin to see them as human beings in search of reunification. This public attention places pressure on the immigration systems and creates solidarity. What was once a private hidden pain become part of a collective movement. And that shift, from isolation, or from the family unit to a larger community, to visibility, is crucial for migrant families. It shows the power of advocacy, of raising one's voice from a young age, and of finding allies outside of the household.
And it is about the community, right? Allies outside of the household, but even outside of, within and beyond the local community, right?
And also, it's a notion of media, not here what we have is media as a tool of amplifying others people's voices, not to impose narratives or interpretation about what others are saying or what others are experiencing. It's more about I'm going to offer you the platform so you can make the call that you want to make, right? What we see, and I want to connect it to the topic of our season. For our listeners, if you're starting to listen in this episode, we have been talking about borders, this 9th season, right? So what Danticat is doing is framing detention centers as another kind of border.
Right.
Yeah, so in Mama's Nightingale, the detention center strips people of dignity, reduces them to case file, and denies children the daily presence of their parents, in this case, the mother, right? Through Saya's perspective, we see how the immigration system replicates the carceral logic of U.S. prisons,
Absolutely.
treating migration as a crime rather than a human right. The judicial delays, the calls for bail visits, the disappearance of a loved one all echo the machinery of mass incarceration in the United States. So by presenting detention as a border within, Danticat critiques immigration policy and the broader prison industrial complex that profits from confinement and thrives on separation. In this way, Mama's Nightingale invites readers of all ages, not only children, to question why the state punishes mixed-status family, such as Saya's.
Right.
Yeah, and to imagine system rooted in family and community unity and justice. So for me, Mama's Nightingale is a blueprint of how love, creativity, and activism can coexist in moments of deep hardship. Storytelling, voice recording, letter writing, and of course community support are coping mechanisms and also strategies of survival and resistance. And Danticat teaches us that in the face of detention and deportation, and in this case possible deportation, there are ways to nurture connection and spark change.
And I love that, you mentioned it's one of your daughter's favorite books, and she's not reading this or listening to this and thinking all of these things, but she is getting it. It's entering her psyche just by the approach that Danticat uses to telling this. The medium of a children's picture book allows for her to, as you mentioned in the beginning, understand that human need for connection in a way that isn't specific to migration, even though this particular story is.
And also, for us, it has detonated really good conversation about citizenship in the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. And why some people have it and why some people don't. And of course, these conversations are simple, right? I present those points in simple terms, but she's aware, right, that not everybody is treated in the same way,
right?
In the country we're currently living.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. So and that is important. Yeah. That we have been able to have important discussions. That she's aware that not all of the perspective that we need to learn from necessarily comes from the U.S. also, right? That there's people from all over the world and that they're in relation to us, and I value that a lot from Danticat's work in general.
Yeah.
But also how she's like using the same template that she's using for her works for adults to a children and for a children's story.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I'm going to talk about a different book, kind of shifting borders, right? Instead of talking about the Caribbean. And what I liked about your choice too was that it wasn't about a physical land border, but that borders come in other forms, right? Mm-hmm. But the one I'm going to look at is more specific to land borders, and it's called Bright Star by Yuyi Morales. And Morales is a Mexican-American children's book author and illustrator. In addition to her own titles, she's illustrated a number of children's books by other authors as well. She's a multi-award-winning author and illustrator and has won the Pura Belpre Medal, which is an award given in recognition to a Latina author and illustrator whose work portrays the Latina cultural experience in a children's book. She's actually won that multiple times, and most recently in 2019 for her book Dreamers or Soñadores. And she was a 2015 Caldecott honoree for her book Viva Frida. Morales is the first Latina to actually receive a Caldecott, which is exciting for her, but really sad for the fact that it took so long.
Yeah.
Morales did not aspire to be an artist or writer when she was younger. In fact, she went to school to become a physical education teacher. But after moving to the U.S. in the 90s, she was introduced to the San Francisco Public Library. There, she was amazed by the selection of children's books, and she used these books to read to her son, but also to teach herself English. The books inspired her to make her own picture books.
And actually, she wrote a book about that experience of going to the library and experiencing the library as a sanctuary space that allowed her to learn about a new country, to connect with her child, but also as a tool that allowed them to feel more at ease, in a very hostile environment.
And that was Dreamers, right?
Mm-hmm,
Yeah,
precisely.
So that was the book Dreamers. Her latest book is called Little Rebels, and it was released just last month of this episode's release date. It was released in September 2025. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but after this one, I definitely look forward to it. One of the things I like about her writing approach and her illustration is that she uses a variety of techniques and drawing styles within her books. She's known for incorporating objects such as dolls and different crafting techniques into her books. This can be seen in Viva Frida as well as in the book that I'm discussing, right, Bright Star, where she uses yarn and photograph textures to bring her images to life. So Bright Star is a book about a fawn who is entering into the world and experiencing new sights and sounds around her. She's navigating her world and being guided by a gentle voice who encourages her to explore, but also to be aware of her surroundings. The same voice, the narrator of the story, encourages the fawn to make her voice heard in a world that has created barriers for her. The jacket blurb for the book tells us that Bright Star is a book for children looking for their place and their voice in a world full of uncertainty. And yeah, that's definitely true, right? But I think it's much more than that. I saw it as a book that teaches children that there is so much that the world has to offer, but also reminds them that there are obstacles and things that will try and prevent them from finding their place in the world. It teaches children to be alert and aware, but also to explore and speak up for themselves. It's like there is that dichotomy. The main character of Bright Star is this fawn, and she and her mother presumably live on the man-made border, as we specified earlier, between Mexico and the United States. When we can understand this, it's never spelled out for us in words, but in visuals, right? We get the desert landscape and the flora and the fauna that would be native to that area. But it's also made very clear to us by the inclusion of a literal border wall that the fawn encounters. While the obstacles that she faces in the book, other than the border wall, are other animals and stormy weather, adult readers will understand the implications of the obstacles faced by migrants making their way to the border, human migrants. Morales' use of colors and textures in her book shift the mood from one of exploration to one of caution. She draws the fawn lying low and hiding among the cacti and looking alert as smoke rolls in. Each page seems to get darker and darker with her color palette until Morales is adding predators such as snakes and jaguars. She also includes stormy weather and dark shadows, right? And all of this kind of builds and builds until the next page you turn and then it's morning and the sun returns. And she's showing the fawn and the children that we are reading this book to that there is hope.
Also, the snakes and jaguars are also important animals within Mexican mythology, right? Aztec mythology. So she's also referring to how the stories of the border allow us to connect to the larger ecosystems of Mexico and the history of Mexico, but also the symbols of strength, of darkness, of struggle. The Mexican flag is precisely an eagle, right? Devouring a snake. So we have that idea of struggle within the notions of Mexicanidad, right? And the jaguar is also a very sacred animal that is also telling us about the indigeneity of the space.
Exactly. Yeah. What I found interesting, though, is that by the end of her book, Morales shifts the perspective of the fawn's story to that of a young human girl, right? Her narrator tells the fawn, sometimes silence tells you secrets and you imagine a new story. You imagine the most beautiful world. And it's on this page where she mentions the most beautiful world that the fawn transforms into a human girl. I find this really interesting because it's a common trope for children to kind of play around and imagine that they're not human, but that they're animals, right? And here Morales goes in the other direction. She moves us toward humanity. Instead of, oh, if I want to survive, I'm going to pretend I'm a tiger or I'm going to pretend I'm a jaguar. It's like, no, we're moving towards humanity and we're showing the value that we hold for one another in the world. She tells the child, you are a bright star inside our hearts. And so she's reaffirming the value in a human life, especially that of a young child, letting them know that even when they're by themselves, they're not alone. They're loved and they're cherished.
In terms of images, she does that also by showing that the t-shirts that the children are wearing are those of the figures we saw before, all the animals, all the elements, natural elements that we saw before in the book.
Everything's connected, right? So speaking of connections, I wanted to, just as you did, connect this back to the border. I mean, obviously the physical border between nations is clearly represented in this book. As I mentioned, we have the border wall and the desert setting. But this story also tells a story that goes beyond the impact of human lives and the border crossing experience on people.
It's not affecting only humans, yeah.
Exactly, right? The book tells the story of the impact of man-made borders and the construction of the border wall on the flora and fauna of the region. Humans crossing the border struggle to find food and water to survive, but so did the other animals who live in that area.
Yeah, we saw that, when with Who's Diane Cristal, right? The stream situation in those border areas, right? Desertic areas, where the weather is very extreme, and the possibilities of survival are in many ways slim.
Right, and animals over centuries have learned migration patterns and they know where to find food and water sources. But if humans are cutting those off, then they will suffer as well. The building of border walls prevents animals from being able to migrate. It's destroyed the plant life, including some of the saguaro cacti that are like over a century old. It's like for people living in the US, maybe like cutting down a sequoia, like it's always been there. And smaller life forms such as insects, algae, and fungi are also being impacted, right? I mean, it's not just the big animals. Yes, the larger animals like wolves, antelope, tortoises, sheep, owls, ocelot, bison, jaguars, and more have had their homes destroyed with the construction of these barriers. I just wanted to bring up, are you familiar with the story of El Jefe, the jaguar?
No, not really. No. Tell me about it.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about this probably in our last episode with the graphic novel that we're covering. But El Jefe was a jaguar that was separated on one side of the U.S.-Mexico border, specifically because his migration trail was cut off by a border wall. And this was back in the 2010s.
So this is a real animal.
It's a real animal. It's a real jaguar that they tagged and were tracking his migration patterns. Yeah. But the wall went up and then his migration route was changed and they were worried about him being able to find food sources because of that. And even as recently as 2024, there was another jaguar along the borderlands named Oshad Nukudam. And it was named that by the Tohono O'odham Nation. In an effort to protect the animal and others of its species, the Tucson Center for Biological Diversity has been in the middle of several legal battles, including one against the Copper World mining project in the San Pedro Valley. So again, these human endeavors centered around capitalism and the prevention of natural human migration and others is affecting animals, I guess, is what I want to get at.
Yeah, so in that sense, we see that Yuyi Morales is also like employing, right, is bringing to us readers, right, an indigenous point of view of the border, right?
Yeah, and her artwork in Bright Star puts the damage caused to the animal and plant life fully on display. On one set of pages, she includes imagery of the border wall with the barbed wire and all of that. The page also shows tire tracks, as well as animals approaching the wall and not knowing what to do, and a number of uprooted saguaro cacti that have been destroyed in the name of separating humanity through the construction of these border walls. Now, the story might read straightforward, but the inclusion of the images allows the space for children to ask questions and for their grown-ups to share with them in, as we talked about, an age-appropriate way, the realities of the border between the U.S. and Mexico. So one thing that really stood out to me from your conversation about Mama's Nightingale was the intertextual aspect of the book, right? You mentioned voice recordings and letter writing.
Yeah, there's a story within a story. The actual Nightingale, there's in that story is following the trace of a rainbow that the baby Nightingale created in order to find the home. So there's that story is within the story as well.
Yeah. And I mean, the voice recordings, the letter writings, like all of this struck me as crucial to understanding the full picture, to knowing the story that she was trying to tell. And Bright Star doesn't have that, but it is a book that plays with textures, or as I mentioned at the beginning, multi-texture-ality, right? In Bright Star, Morales uses actual pieces of yarn and bright colored papers to help make the book. In the final 2 pages of the book, and the part that maybe kids won't sit through, especially young ones, but that grown-ups will likely take the time to read, she shares that the yarn actually came from Oaxaca and Chiapas. So she's actually incorporated, in addition to that, paint, photograph textures. Like she took photographs of materials that were used in the border wall to create her paintings. And she also used digital art along with the weaving and embroidery created from that yarn that she acquired. So I thought that
it's a level of intertextuality as well, like cultural intertextuality, because it's just, again, she's like bringing that indigenous perspective through the objects that she's like putting together, the type of collage that she's creating. That for those who know, right, it's they're connected to also to the Mayan population in the south of Mexico. So she's also tracing a connection with the south and the north, and in the book. Right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think, she uses the yarn when making that connection to actually like stitch the words that are on the page. And so it is intertextual even within the context of the words.
The texture is bringing us cultural text, right?
Exactly.
The cultural text of the Mayan people, right? But in conversation with the other indigenous form of storytelling and her own as a diasporic Mexican woman.
Yeah, I thought it was very well done, and the artwork is just gorgeous. And then to read that she does this in different forms in different books that she's written, it added another layer to it, right? Because she really is taking the time to understand that the story she's telling can maybe better be portrayed through found objects, created objects, and that intercultural
and the objects
approach.
Are not necessarily served, or at least the intention is not the objects to serve aesthetically, but more the aesthetics are allowing us, to see larger connections, within the book. Again, this is something that is probably allowing adults to really connect in a different way to the book. Children might see it and like it because it's colorful, because maybe they like the texture. They have like a sensation that the books evokes. But for adults who knows how to recognize these objects, it becomes something more profound.
And it just really goes to show that a created children's book really is for everyone. It's not just for kids, right? You get your books that have like, press this dot and turn this page and crinkle this whatever. But a book like both of the ones that we talked about today really they have so much depth in them beyond just the words on the page. So I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about the intertextuality in your book choice.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I feel that in many ways, the young Saya, the protagonist, becomes a stand-in for Edwidge Danticat herself, who has long used her visibility as an award-winning writer to tell migration stories from the perspective, again, as I said before, of Haitians, but also the wider Black diaspora. Right? Danticat has carried this work across many genres, through fiction, through journalism, through essays, and even film. She has done like documentary and fiction films as well. But she's always centering the life experience of migrants. Yeah, that is a constant thing that you can find in all of her books, all of her documentaries. Yeah. And one of her most powerful books is a collection of essays that is called, the name of the book is Create Dangerously, The Immigrant Artist at Work. And there she speaks directly to this responsibility. In it, she reflects on how artists who come from histories of exile, dictatorship, and displacement create for survival, for testimony, and for social transformation. So for Danticat, art becomes an act of resistance against authoritarian governments that silence dissent, against colonial systems that devalue Black lives, and against the narrative that reduce migrants to statistics. Yeah. So this is deeply connected to what we're being exploring here today, that children can learn to see art and storytelling as tools of advocacy when power tries to erase it. And Danticat herself shared her own story at the very end of the book, again, in that section that is kind of like for adults that you were like referring to. So at the very end, Danticat herself shares her own story of family separation and how she spent years apart from her mother and father because her family didn't have and she uses the Saya's words, or the right papers. Yeah, for her, writing Saya's story was a form of healing, a way of addressing the trauma of being kept away from loved ones. Yeah, but through Saya, Danticat is not only processing her pain, she's urging us to reimagine migration with compassion, with dignity and justice at the center, while also reminding us that defending freedom of expression is part of the struggle for a more human world.
And honestly, I think we can sum up both of these books this way, right? We're asked to reconsider migration in Bright Star as something that affects more than humanity.
Yeah, precisely. And I like how we can put them, both of them in conversation. One is a very humane story of family separation, but in the other we see also like how this type of displacement are also affecting our ecosystems.
Yeah, but still bringing it back to, hey, also humans, right? It's like all of the above is what we're talking about here. I thought maybe we could recommend another book for our listeners that maybe falls under these same border stories. And this is one that I'm actually in the middle of reading right now, or about 3/4 of the way through. It's called We Are Not From Here, and it's by Jenny Torres Sanchez. It's technically a YA book, not a young children's story. As it deals with 3 teens who flee their home in Guatemala and travel to the U.S. on La Bestia, which we talked about in our last episode.
Yeah,
and so
that's the train. The extremely dangerous train, that many migrants take. And
I think one of the things we talked about in that discussion was that the documentary didn't really show those dangers. And the book does. The book does in spades. I mean, the majority of the book so far is, I think 1 out of 5 sections was them in Guatemala and sharing with us the conditions that had them fleeing in the first place.
Exactly.
And the rest of it is, so far, has been on La Bestia and the things that they've encountered or experienced or lives that have been lost along the way are really showing up here, which we didn't get in the documentary. And not that we wanted to see that, not that, but I didn't feel like they really went into depth with it. And this narrative, although fiction, really does explore it pretty well.
Not to get back into that discussion, because you can listen to that episode. Or go back to that episode. But in the documentary, it's more about how there's a level of brotherhood or of camaraderie, of unification that happens among migrants. Yeah, but again, there's the shortcoming of the documentary is that it only leaves it there, right? It doesn't get into the actual dangers of the train and the how that is also part of the path that it's full of possibilities of death.
And the three teens that leave, one of them has just, before she leaves, this is really early in the book, she gives birth. And we find out who the father of that baby is and how he's basically, forcing her to be with him. And he's also like a leader in a gang or trying to maintain power. And he sees that these two teen boys who happen to be friends with her, they have witnessed something, and he uses them witnessing that crime against them to bring them into his fold. And they're like, we are going to be killed if we don't escape now. Right? So it is very heavy. And it even talks about when they leave, the girl cuts her hair off so that she can maybe try to pass as a boy a little bit more on the journey, because there are risks in that as well.
It's a journey of survival, of extreme survival.
Or not, as the case may be in some instances. So it's a very heavy book. But if you are curious about kind of exploring the reasons behind that journey.
The reason behind this migration.
I think it's a great YA look at those reasons.
And as we mentioned in the previous episode, those are the type of story that usually get erased or not included or not considered at all.
And I think it might be a Pura Belpré nominee, if not a winner.
So I want to recommend an author that we read a lot at home. Is Duncan Tonatiuh. And in specific, his books are really fantastic. And he's very productive. So there's you can check out any of his books. But today I wanna highlight Dear Primo. Querido Primo, a letter to my cousin. And this is another picture book that invites children to see across borders and recognize the connections that unite us. Unite a family, that unite different communities. There's letter writing here again, but the letters are exchanged between Charlie, who lives in the U.S., el primo que vive en Estados Unidos, and his cousin Carlitos, who lives in El Campo in Mexico. So readers come to understand two different voices, and that these two boys are experiencing different things, differences in food, in transportation, or their daily routines. But these are not the only part of the story. The differences are there. They're like reading about them, but we see that there's more to their comparative approach to narrating their life. What truly shines through is the love of play. The love of family, of safety, protection that can come with the family. And with a community, and also the imagination that the children share. Not only, and regardless of the place they're living. Right? So in a way, it is about the similarities of their lives as well. Right? So Tonatiuh's story makes an important point for young readers that borders, again, are human-made, but kinship and community are natural, enduring, and they transcend our borders. So Tonatiuh's book is an introduction to ideas of equity and justice, reminding us that migrants and their families are not defined by separation, but by connection. And they're striving for connection. Yeah. So it also sparks conversation about how cultures enrich one another. Yeah. So the Mexican culture is as important as the Mexican American culture in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah. The rural culture is also as important as the urban culture.
Okay.
Yeah. So we see different levels of that. Yeah?
Right.
And again, how community and family ties stretch beyond the limits of maps.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for this episode. If you have anything to add to the conversation, you can always reach out to us on social media or by email.
Yeah, follow the podcast on Instagram and Blue Sky at Latinx Visions. Our email address is latinxvisions@gmail.com. We love to include your thoughts in a future episode.
Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Share us with your friends and family. Subscribe and leave a 5-star review to help others find the pod.
And stay tuned for our next episode where we will continue the conversation about borders with a discussion of Frontera by Julio Anta and Jacoby Salcedo. Así que, mi gente, estamos a la escucha.
Dale. Until next time.